Good afternoon, everybody. I appreciate the fact that you're here seeing how the weather is terrible and the time is what it is. So even better because it means that you are quite interested in listening to what I have to say. Now, before we start, I would like to ask, who of you already has some experiences with the Chinese gaming market? Like, raise your hand if you do. Okay, quite a few people. Um, who does like more stuff, as in you have, for example, a Chinese employee, a Chinese partner company. Okay, some, not a lot. All right. Um, so the presentation for today is a game developer's guide to the Chinese market. My name is Damian Jaśkowski, and I am the coordinator for the Chinese market at the Polish Indie Games Foundation, as well as the expert for the East Asian markets at 11 Beat Studios. And why am I presenting this particular topic is because back in 2015, as I was still a student in Beijing studying economics, I was writing my thesis, like one of many, on the same topic pretty much, because I preferred to write on the same topic, which was the Polish video game market back then. And at the time, I was invited to the Polish embassy in Beijing to take the post of creative industry expert. And one of the main tasks that I was given as the expert was to get to know the Chinese market, was to reach out to people, was to meet with them, was to talk to them, was to get to know as much as humanly possible about the Chinese market, about the risks, the possibilities, and everything it has to offer. In particular, for Polish video game developers, of course, because it was the Polish embassy. So sorry. Uh, but the point was that we did notice that not many people knew what China is all about. They knew that there is a country like that. Some of them actually knew that there's a huge gaming market over there, but just not the details, right? So back in 2018, because it took me 3 years to gather all the information, to talk to people, to confirm all the data, because we're going to go into that in a couple of minutes. That's very complicated. And we published the first Chinese gaming market report in 2018. And quite a few things have changed over the years. So I'm happy to say that this year, like soon, before the end of the year, there will be a new version of the report. It's going to be made available to everybody for complete free through the embassy web pages, through the Polish Indie Games Foundation pages, and all the gaming pages that we can reach out to. So you'll be able to download everything, go through all the details, et cetera, et cetera. But before that, I'm going to go with you through everything to make sure that, you get the boost that you need and that you understand everything that I would like you to understand. So we're going to start with the basics, of course, but a very brief intro into the market. $20 billion in revenue in the first half of 2023. Because if you look at the Chinese market, there was a slump in the revenue, in the number of gamers on the market back in 2021 and 2022. That was, of course, mainly due to COVID and different factors that impacted the market. We're going to go through that in a second. But we can see that the market is getting back to its former self. It's rising again. And we actually have a new world record in terms of the number of players, which is 668 million players as of, I think it was June 2023. Now, the market went through a difficult period over the past few years. COVID was one thing, of course, but another thing was that there was a hold, a freeze on the ISBN application. So new games that want to reach the Chinese market that are to be distributed locally need to get an ISBN number. And for pretty much 2 years, we didn't get any ISBN numbers. There was a freeze because of discussions of whether of which ministry should be able to grant those licenses. That is finally over, and right now, if you look at the official ministry websites, you'll see that we have, like, every month there's about 100 new titles that get the ISBN numbers, mostly casual games because it's like easier for those to get the ISBN. But at least the market is getting back to its former self. And there's also the game addiction crackdown, which means I'm sure that some of you might have heard that minors in China are not allowed to play during the week. They can play on Friday and on the weekends, and the amount of time that they can spend in games is limited. So like all the game developers need to, that publish their games locally, especially Chinese game developers, need to implement a system to track like how long the players are playing. And if they are under 18 years of age, then they have to limit their time. Now, if we look at the market from the market segments, of course, mobile is king. Like it's king everywhere, but in China, it's the emperor pretty much. So like you have 76% of the total net worth of the market is mobile, and PC console is about 20%. And like, browser games, VR, AR, those are like really small numbers. Free to play is always better than premium games, which I do know is not typical, for example, for Polish game developers, because we do prefer to produce games and sell them on a premium basis rather than as a service. But that's just not something that Chinese players prefer, but it does not mean that they won't buy premium games. It just means that they are more likely to pay in a game than for a game. Now, we said that there's 668 million players in China. Most of them are mobile, and we have an estimated of 320 million players, PC players, console players, and about 30 million Steam monthly active users. Now, if you go through different websites and different reports on the Chinese market, which I have done extensively over the years, I hate 90% of them because 90% of them are wrong. Now, the number 30 million is monthly active users. It does not refer to all the users from China on Steam. And more importantly, there is like something to it. Now, the Chinese gaming market presents challenges and risks. And the first challenge is the data. What I have told you about the number of players, number of PC players, number of monthly active users on Steam, those are all estimates. And nobody can give you an exact number how many players actually are there on different platforms. Because for Steam, you're going to have many Chinese players who are using VPNs to access Steam. You're going to have many Chinese players who are using accelerators, because Steam has better and worse days in China. It means that on one day it's okay, you can download games, you can play games, etc. Another day it just doesn't work. Like you can't download anything, you can't open anything. So what the Chinese people do is they use accelerators, which are kind of like VPNs, but like specific for Steam. And like you aren't going to see them on Steam like as you would see players from the United States, from Germany, etc., etc. So like all the data that we have is always estimate. Number of players, number of active users, what they play, how much do they spend. You have to get like used to it, the idea that you're not gonna know everything. You have to just believe it works pretty much. Now, another challenge is, of course, the local laws and regulations. As I've mentioned, in order to publish a game locally on local platforms, which are, for example, WeGame, um, TapTap, for example, those are platforms that require games to have the ISBN number, which means that you have to apply for that number uh, at a specific bureau. They are going to check through your game to check if it fits certain criteria. And if it does, then you will be granted an ISBN number and you will be able to publish your game locally. Of course, it's not as easy as it sounds because the regulations aren't very clear. That's basically how it usually works in China. So like sometimes you'll see something, for example, which is okay in one game, but not okay in another. You'll see that something is okay in one bureau, in one city, but in another, like the people behind the desk say, oh yeah, that's not gonna work. You have to change the game. Uh, so again, it takes a while to get used to the idea. Now, another challenge is, of course, cultural foreignness. Because if you think of China, well, you usually know as much about China as Chinese people know about Poland. Not a lot. You know it's kind of there. You might have met a couple of people, and you might have been in a restaurant that has Chinese food, which is actually a Vietnamese restaurant, but like, it's so the same, isn't it? So it's foreign to us. Like the ideas that they have, their sentiments, like their certain viewpoints on particular issues, even their aesthetics is completely different than ours. They have their own specific sense of humor. What we find funny, they might not find funny at all. And what they find funny, I do not find funny at all, definitely. But you have to live with it. And of course, the final one is piracy and plagiarism. Um, Piracy is still a problem in China, but it does not mean that Chinese people don't buy games. They do, but do have in mind that, for example, like if you're going for the Steam prices, like Steam has this pricing system where you can choose the price of the game, and it has like, a recommended price for a particular region. Don't go over it. Like if you want to go, like change the price, go down, but don't go up. Because for Chinese people, like if you go to certain Chinese websites, I don't want to mention the names, but like, the most popular gaming websites in China, usually you see a post like an article about your game, and at the bottom of the page, you see a link to download a copy of the game. Like imagine going to IGN, reading about your game, and then at the bottom, there's just like click download and there you have it. So because it's so easy, why would they pay, right? But they do have like, uh, younger people, they do learn about copyright issues, et cetera, so they will buy the game. But like if the price is too high, do have in mind that not everybody is going to be able to pay the price, especially because the people that you're aiming your game towards are usually students, young people who don't have their own money. They have their parents' money. And in China, there is not a single student who would tell their parents that they want money to buy a game. There is no way, okay? So that is a challenge that you have to face. Now, plagiarism as well. If you have like successful games, I'm 100% sure that there's already a Chinese mobile game that uses your screenshots to promote their game. Like it's very typical. You're gonna find many games that like um, are inspired by foreign games, and that's also like a complicated concept because the border between inspiration and copying something is, you know, it can move a bit. So what Chinese people consider inspiration, we can consider copying, right? We can consider plagiarism. For them, not necessarily. So basically, uh, those are the challenges and risks. And then we have the trends. So what games are popular in China? FPS, MOBA, RPG, and strategy games. Those for top sellers. Does that mean that other games won't make it on the market? No. Of course they will. But those games are the most popular. But there are certain things that if you look at your games and if you wonder like, should I try like, to reach out to the Chinese market? There are things that you might have in mind. First of all, does the game have co-op? If it doesn't, chances are it's not going to be as successful as a game that does. Because Chinese people like to work in groups, they like to spend time in groups. Even if they play, they like to play together. It's part of Chinese culture. Nobody likes sitting alone. So single player games aren't really that important, as well as the story, because the story is usually important for single player players, right? Is for single player gamers, right? Now, if you prefer co-op, you don't really care about the story that much. So if you look, for example, at Chinese games, I actually like, because in the past I did do some translations of games. And I remember I was translating a game from Chinese into English, and there were different skills in the game, like, some magic that you could use, some fireballs, frozen boats and stuff like that. And I was like looking at the names all in 4 characters because it needs to sound nice, and Chinese people like 4 characters. And I had no idea what these are. I mean, I knew that something with fire, but like you don't get the idea of how it looks like. So like I went and asked the developer, like, could they give me some, like, GIFs or short videos to, so I can see how those things look like how do the spells look like, so I can give them new names. And they're like, yeah, whatever. Like the person that gave the names in the Chinese version didn't see them either, because they don't care. As long as it's fun, it's totally okay. So if you have, for example, a game set in medieval Rome, but you think, well, might as well add, I don't know, a flamethrower, sure, they're gonna like it. Like if the gameplay is okay, if from the perspective of gameplay it's fun, they don't care about the lore. Now, something very important, Chinese players are less likely to add comments on Steam, but if they do, most of their comments are going to be negative. Do have that in mind. They have a tendency for negative comments. I think it was like 50% more negatives, for example, than the US. And especially in the recent years, because like we had a discussion with China Indie Game Alliance, and we were discussing, like, the trends in players, like the changes after COVID. And apparently after COVID, like there's more anxiety, more depression among young people um, that are facing as well some, economic difficulties. So they're more eager and more likely to add negative comments in the very first minutes of gameplay. Like, especially if the tutorial is not clear enough, they're gonna comment like immediately that the game is shit. So do have that in mind. It's not like, because we're kind of used to the idea that Chinese players, like, they need the challenge, right? You know, Asian difficulty level, right? Well, not anymore. What they want now is they want to have fun, but not that much of a challenge. Okay, so those are the basics. But what I'm mostly focused on, and what the new version of the report is going to focus on, are the steps that you need to take. And we're going to go through all the steps depending on the situation your company is in, because different companies have different needs, have different expectations, different possibilities, different resources that you can allocate to reaching out to the Chinese market. So depending on your situation, choose one. Step one, what's your platform? Now, if you have a mobile game, you need to apply for an ISBN number and go for local distribution. There is no distribution of foreign mobile games in China without an ISBN number. Whether it's like free to play, whether it's premium, whether you earn money through ads, not important. You need to have an ISBN number. I mean, there are some situations where some Chinese partners will tell you that, yeah, you don't need an ISBN number for this game. It's not because you don't, it's because they think that the game is not going to be that impactful that anybody will notice that it doesn't have that number. So, different idea. And if you have a mobile game, you don't really have to care about localization. I mean, it's nice to add it because you're gonna release the game globally usually. So like you're gonna have players in Singapore, for example, who speak Chinese, or you're gonna have players all around the world, like Chinese people, international students, generally Chinese-speaking people living abroad who might be interested in the game and they might play it, but it's not going to be a critical factor in the success of your game. Because it's not going to be available in China. They don't have Google Play. They like the Apple Store is completely different. Like the amount of games is limited to those that have an ISBN number. So you're not gonna reach them this way anyway. So you don't need to focus on the localization. Now, if you're going for PC or console games, you're going for international distribution. You can apply for an ISBN number for such games. Takes about a year at least, usually 2 years. Not much of any worthiness in it whatsoever. because you're not going to wait 2 years until you release the game. So you're going to release it globally, and Chinese people can buy it on Steam already, because remember that they do have access to the international version of Steam. So you might not know it, but you're already selling your games in China, right? Now, why would they buy it on local platforms 2 years later, especially if you need to, like, change the content to apply local regulations and laws? They're not going to be interested. So focus on the international distribution. So you have Steam, like Epic is okay too, but definitely like Steam is way more popular in China. It does work, but it does have worse and better days. So sometimes it might be that you're not going to have sales in China because Steam is down, but then a couple of days later it's going to be up again, and you can also go for key distribution. So like there are platforms that are going to distribute keys like Songfo, like Heybox. You can like sign a contract with them and just provide them with Steam keys, and they sell them through their platforms, which is basically a good idea, especially if you think about Steam China, which someday probably will appear. Nobody knows when, nobody knows how it's going to work, but just in case, like, arranging beforehand might be a good idea. And then there's VR and AR, which is a bit complicated, because generally speaking, VR and AR games also need to have an ISBN number to be distributed locally. But if you talk to Chinese partners, and if you're doing VR games or AR games, I highly suggest you do that, because your games are not going to be sold as games. Like in many situations, because the VR market, AR market in China is completely different. So either those games are going to end up as games in VR, like, um, internet cafes. So people are not going to play them at home, but at a specific place together with their friends. Or they might end up as training programs. So for example, games that have, like, car mechanic or plane mechanic, those are most probably going to be distributed among students learning how to repair a car, etc., etc. Because there's a huge market for that. And actually the money you can make off of that market is way bigger than the money you can make off of the actual VR game market. So it's a bit more complicated, but still. Now, number two, or step two, does your game support Chinese? If your answer is no, that's where you start. 没有中文, there's no Chinese in the game. That is the most popular negative comment you'll find among Chinese people on Steam. If your game does not provide Chinese localization, it sucks. That's like not a question even. You need to have localization. Chinese people don't speak English. And I don't mean like, do you speak English? Oh no, I just speak a little bit. No, it's like, do you speak English? Nothing. And I've been to Japan recently, just like to diverge for a minute. They don't speak English either. Not a sentence. So you need Chinese. Now, quality over quantity. It's easy to find a company that would do the localization for you, but most of them suck as well. Like, we've been through many different companies. It's really hard to find one that will do very good Chinese localization, but it's important that you find a good company, and it's important, like, that you make sure that the localization is good, because the second uh, most popular comment among hateful commenters is the fact that the Chinese localization is bad, or Qifan, so like, machine translated, which is not necessarily the case, but sometimes, like, you have companies that do the translations, they don't give keys out to the translators, they never see the game, so like it's not going to work. Remember that Chinese is not English, it's not German, it's a completely different language group, which means that there's not enough in common to be able to blindly translate a text. If you get a text in English and you translate it without like context, without seeing the item that it's speaking about, it's already hard. But in Chinese, you're gonna make a lot of mistakes. Now, the thing that many people mix is simplified versus traditional. So you can actually see on the slide, like on the left is traditional, on the right, the red letters are simplified. It's a different way of writing. It's like writing the same pretty much, but a different way of writing. The thing that you are, the version that you are interested in usually is simplified Chinese. That's the language that is used, that is written in mainland China. So like the huge market. Traditional Chinese is used in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and all around the world in like, Chinatowns, et cetera, et cetera. It is a certain market, but not as big, definitely. So like you would focus on simplified Chinese. Now you can also consider a Chinese voiceover, which is a good idea, especially in today's times, because like more and more companies have Chinese localization, and in order to kind of like boost the sales, to like differentiate yourself from different companies, you might consider localization. Now, there's Putonghua Chinese and Mandarin Chinese. Putonghua Chinese is like the standard Chinese spoken in mainland China. Mandarin Chinese is the version spoken in Taiwan. So, like, if you're going for mainland China, then definitely Putonghua Chinese is what you need. So, when you're going to talk to VO companies, that's what you ask for, not just Chinese, right? And there's also Cantonese, which is spoken in Hong Kong and Canton, obviously. But like it's just a spoken language, and like it's not a huge market. I mean, Disney does like Cantonese VOs, but unless you're Disney and you have like a couple of $1 billion to spend, I wouldn't recommend it. So if you already have the localization, yeah, we're at step 3. Question is, do you have significant income from the Chinese market? And by significant, I mean about $80,000 or euros per year. Of course, I do realize that in game dev, like it's not the same every year, because every time you release a game, that like the income goes up, and then you have periods of not releasing any game where the income is lower. But if you like take an average, 80K a year, if not, then what you do is you find a Chinese partner. Um, you outsource the work and you outsource the costs. Your partner, which is going to be called a publisher by the Chinese, but in your understanding, it would mostly act like an agency actually, because a Chinese publisher, what they understand by the name publisher, is like with you from the point that the game is ready until like you finish the sales. Like they're not going to help you with the development. That's not what they do. They're not going to help. They're not going to help you with technology, etc., etc. Like so, things that a Western publisher would help you with, that's not what a Chinese publisher usually would do, right? So they act more like an agency. They help you. They take care of the social media. They take care of preparing all the materials, etc., etc. And of course, because they do all that for free, in return, they want a share of the revenue. Usually, like I can't say for all companies, but usually it's 50-50. And of course, you have limited control over communication. So you're not going to know what they're posting on social media in China. I mean, you can check it, of course, but unless you can speak Chinese, chances are you're not going to know what they're saying. Do have that in mind, because as we have mentioned, like there is this cultural foreignness. So like certain things that they might find fun might not necessarily work with you, right? Especially if you have some sensitive topics, etc. And when you try to find a partner for yourself, do ask for recommendations. Like usually they'll have some portfolio. Usually they'll say, "Oh, we've worked with this company, with that company." Go and ask those people, okay? Because it in Chinese culture, um, how to put it nicely, the crucial step is to get the client. So they might tell you more than there is to a story than there actually is. which basically means that you might call a certain partner and get to know that, oh yeah, we've never heard about them. Yeah. So ask, go ask, and ask how it was. Like, how was the communication? Can they speak English? Like, do they respond immediately, or like, because different companies have different styles, work differently. So if you ask, and you know whether you want to like engage with that particular partner. Now, so that's step 3. But what if you actually do have significant income from the Chinese market? So you are publishing your games, you get some money, and that money is over $80,000 a year, but less than $180,000 a year. Now, that's a good time to find a agency for yourself. So not a publisher, but an actual agency. An agency that will take care of your social media, that will take care of influencer outreach, an agency that will take care of preparing all the graphical assets so that you don't have to, because you don't know Chinese. It takes time with your graphics designer. The Chinese people are going to say it doesn't look well, that the font is wrong. An agency is someone who can do that for you. You don't have to worry about that. Now, the pluses are you outsource the work, so you don't have to care about it. They know how to do it, and you don't have to. Uh, and there's no rev share, right? Usually. But on the other hand, you bear the cost because you have to pay the agency for their work, and you have limited control again over the contents because sometimes they will like post content on their own. Now, how much can that cost? The fees are different for many agencies. Um, there are agencies, for example, that like just assign a person for you, and you have to pay like a couple of thousand euros or pounds or dollars for that. And there are also agencies that work per hour. I've seen agencies working per 20 hours, per 10 hours, even agencies working for like per 10 hours, right? Generally, the prices are between 1,000 and 2,000 dollars per 20 hours a month, like so that they spend on that particular project. But if you go for an agency, like if you decide, okay, that's what we're doing, we're ready for that, try to find a specialized agency rather than a global one. Um, in the past few years, like when I was doing a similar presentation like a couple of years ago, when we were releasing the first version of the report, I would not recommend working with agencies. At the time, like the agencies were like terrible. And especially global agencies, like it was so outstanding how much you can fuck something up. I actually got, for example, a list from an agency, and a friend asked me to go through the list. It was a list of media representatives that were supposed to receive a collector's edition of their game. And even they noticed, not knowing Chinese, that something is off. And there was like 20 people on the list. And I checked the links to their websites. And actually, I knew 3 of them, like from Chinese media. Uh, I didn't know the rest. There were some gaming websites that I didn't know, and I'm not actually sure if they're real websites. But there was, for example, a guy that had 3 posts on an automobile forum, and the game had nothing to do with like cars, anything. Like, I suppose he was somebody's friend, and somebody thought, well, might as well give him a game. Like, I mean, I'm not paying for it, so why not, right? Because there's nobody who can check it. There's a guy in China who sends the list, and there's a guy somewhere who gets that list, doesn't know a word in Chinese, and just sends it further, right? So if you want to find an agency, go for specialized agencies that just do China. If they do the whole world and China, chances are they're not doing it good. Especially since usually you need to be in China like to actually be able to do it good. Now, what if you have really high income from China? So above around 180K a year. Now that's step 5 when you're ready to build a team. Because of course you can work with agencies, but if you pay per hour, it's going to be expensive. So when you really have that money, a good idea is to find a Chinese employee. Now, a Chinese employee would usually take about $4,000 a month, depending on their experience. Of course, if you want somebody very experienced, it's going to go sky high. Employees in China, especially those who have expertise, are expensive. Like, there's huge discrepancy between people who have no experience and people with experience. So the 4,000 a month is like the basic amount of money that you have to pay him. Do have in mind that you also have to pay your own fees, like depending what kind of contract you work on, etc., etc. Now, uh, if you had an agency for that same amount of money, it would be about 40 hours. If it's an employee, you have the whole month that he can work, right? And he's going to be focused on your project, because in an agency, of course, like they do their best, I suppose, and I hope so at least. Uh, but they're never going to be focused on your projects 100% of the time, because they have other clients. It's normal, right? It's just like in any company, like you have a couple of the games that you are developing. You're not going to focus everything on one game, right? Unless it's the only game you do. So if it's your employee, then he's going to focus on your games. But do have in mind that I wrote Chinese employee, not Chinese speaking employee, because in Poland it would be like preferred by most people, I suppose, to hire a Polish person, like somebody who graduated Chinese studies and they know Chinese. I've been speaking Chinese for quite a while, and I've met a lot of people who have graduated from Chinese studies in Poland. I have met 2 people that actually speak Chinese. And I was actually teaching translation at a university to students of Chinese. Like, I would not give them translation at all, ever, like paid for. It's very hard to learn Chinese, just as hard as it is for Chinese people to learn English, because it's a completely different, language group, language family, etc., etc. It's just as hard for Polish people or English people to learn Chinese. So most people speak a bit, but like if you want to go towards native speaker level, yeah, you're not gonna be able to pay a person that much. So better find a Chinese person. Um, of course, a Chinese person, preferably speaking English, and preferably someone who has experience working with overseas partners, because again, there are cultural differences, etc., that will facilitate a lot. And look for people with gaming experiences, because do have in mind that like as we're going through this presentation, basically you know more about the Chinese gaming market right now than most people who speak Chinese, and people who have worked, for example, in marketing, etc., but have never worked with games. They're not going to know a lot. And especially if they've been working in marketing, for example, in like, I don't know, cosmetics or something like that, it's completely different, right? And you know that when you hire Polish people, like, for posts, like general posts, right? So do try to find somebody who has certain experience. And it's important to get those Chinese employees, first one, and then obviously, like, more. There's the idea. Because they are going to build your network. Because when you work with an agency or when you work with a publisher, it's okay if you don't have the assets to allocate towards building your own network. But a Chinese employee builds your own network. You can change an employee and the network stays with you. But if you change an agency, the network goes with the agency, right? So building your own network is an important part. So the 5 steps that you can take depending on your situation, your resources, your possibilities. Now, how can you reach out to your fan base in China? Just a couple of words because like Wojtek is gonna have a presentation on Bilibili and Heybox like in a couple of minutes, and he's going to go into some more detail. But like the things that I would like you to know, like in the basics, and that are going to be included in the report as well. Now, game-oriented social media. I repeat that every time, and to me, it seems like so stupid to say it. Everybody knows that. But then every once in a while, I have a company that comes to me and asks, like, could you give us some advice? Because we're kind of trying to reach out to China, but it just isn't working. Okay, so what are you doing? Well, we bought some ads on Facebook, but nobody's clicking them. Great idea, Facebook. Try YouTube next time. Like those websites are blocked in China. Like if you try to open YouTube on China, it's an error. So you won't find Chinese people on YouTube. You won't find them on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Those sites don't exist in China. So much so, in fact, that if you ask a typical person what Facebook is, they have no idea. They've never heard the name, even if you say it in Chinese, by the way. They've never heard the name because they have no need for it, right? So you need to know that they use different apps, different websites, different social media, and if you want to reach out to them, you have to use them as well. Now, there are many of them. They change every once in a while. A couple of years ago, I would say, for example, that Weibo is a good source for promoting your games. Times change. Weibo is dying. I didn't say that. I hope. Uh, we're gonna cut it from the video. So like today, the two platforms that I would recommend for you basically, that's important, but that in a second, are Bilibili and Heybox. Bilibili is kind of like YouTube and Twitch and like a couple of different websites, but mostly those. Uh, what's important, you can have your own account, like an official account on Bilibili. Uh, you can post videos, you can post news, and you can build your own community around Bilibili. I remember that when Rockstar, like they registered an official account on Bilibili, I think within 24 hours they had like 500,000 followers, like immediately. So that's where you build your community. That's where they are going to follow your post on their feed, etc., etc. Of course, if you post videos, it's like best, but you can also post images, like and stuff like that. And content creators are going to be on Bilibili. So like influencers, KOLs, people that you want to reach out to are going to be on Bilibili, and you can actually contact them like through instant messages. Whether or not they're gonna read it, it's a different story. But chances are, if your game is good, that they will be interested, right? And they can also do live streams, which you usually cannot, by the way, because like it's complicated to do a live stream with a white person on the screen. You have to have special permits, etc. So you're not gonna do that usually. A different platform is Heybox, which is mostly about news posting, key distribution, because it's a distributor of keys. It's kind of like a Steam accelerator as well. You can post informations about promotions, about sales. You can do some lucky rolls, like when you roll keys to your games, because on Heybox you can build like a community, you can have followers, but the users of Heybox are not used to following the feed. So like you can have 100,000 followers on Heybox, post a news piece, and you're gonna have like 5 views because they're not gonna notice it because they don't look there. Like it's not the main thing they see when they open the app. When they open the app, they get the news feeds like from the app, which you can make it too if the news is important and if the news gets comments, gets reactions, etc., like automatically it ends up on the main page. So for example, if you do a lucky roll and like make people comment, so for example, you can win a key to Cyberpunk 2077, but you have to post a comment and say, well, what is your favorite Chinese dish? Then people are going to post, and that's going to make it like, perpetuate your place on the feed. Because again, sometimes you end up on the feed, but as people stop commenting, You go down and you disappear. So two completely different platforms. Um, do have in mind that Haybox offers some great options like viewing how many players you have, etc., etc. But like Wojtek is going to dive deeper into that in a couple of minutes, so you can learn some more. And one platform that I did not mention, TikTok, which in Chinese is Douyin. Um, Basically, don't try it on your own. Like, it's okay to use TikTok for promotion, but not for creating your own accounts, because like the amount of money it takes today to promote a TikTok account in China, like a Douyin account, from scratch is tremendous. Like, you're not gonna afford it unless there's CD projects sitting somewhere. You're not gonna afford it. So it's better, like, you can work with influencers, but like, just don't go into creating your own account. Now, some good marketing practices. Content translation versus localization. Remember that it's not just about the language, but Chinese people like have their own culture, have their own aesthetics, as we have mentioned already. So if you take a look at like the screenshot from Bilibili, you'll notice that the letters are bigger. Not only the letters on the thumbnails, right? They're colorful. They're kind of cheesy actually, but you know, it's up to the people what they like. They're colorful, then they're big. You have very long titles so that they're easier to like, you're easier to end up on the video if you're looking for something in the search engine. And even the subtitles in videos are bigger. That's because, first of all, Chinese is more complicated. Like, a letter A and the Chinese character for something is completely different. So they need to be bigger by design. And everybody is going to view your content on their phones. Do have that in mind. Like, they're not going to open their computers to check Bilibili. Like, I do believe it was like 97% of internet traffic in China is through mobile phones. So if you make tiny letters, ain't nobody gonna see that. Okay. And considering media and influencers, um, it's pretty similar to the Western world actually, because you have traditional media which are in decline. So for example, websites that were the most popular, like 3DM, Gamer Sky, they are losing viewers. And some of them actually turn to different forms of earning money. So some of them are going to go for sponsored content. So you can buy banners, you can buy some pop-ups, etc., etc. They engage in PR and marketing, so they act as agencies that you can reach out to and do some stuff with them. Um, they also try their chances in publishing, so they act as publishers for your games. Just like they're trying to find something like a different source of income. The influencers are on the rise, similarly as in the Western world, and both are financially out of reach. Uh, a banner on one of the most popular websites costs about 170,000 zlotys for 24 hours, by the way. That's a lot. An influencer can ask, like I've seen influencers with 100,000 followers ask for 1,000,000 yuan, Chinese yuan, which is like around 600,000 Polish zlotys for doing some content. They can do a lot of stuff for free, basically, if you have good contact with them or if they like the game, obviously. But like if you're going for paid content, usually just forget about it. It's out of reach. Okay, so those were the basics. There's going to be much more later this year when we publish the report. I encourage you to look out for it, and if it appears, to read it. Like there's a lot of information that we've gathered as we compared with different institutions that is really unique, and like we're so proud that we made it. Um, so yeah, thank you so much. And if you have any questions, now's the time. Yeah. Do we have a, yeah, oh, yeah.
Hello, very nice talk. So, actually, two questions. The first one is going to be a reference to a talk that someone else gave before from Beaver Town or Timberborn. I'm sorry, I forgot the title now. The Beaver game, the Beaver strategy game. And they actually described the experience with Chinese market that they tried going through agency and it completely flopped. That they cannot judge if they did their job well and stuff, but they just made no sense. So, in relation to this, would you actually like I know that this everything is going to be more specific, but would you say that for an indie game in like this city building and related genres, would you say there's any point in actually trying, apart from maybe basic translation, to reach the Chinese market, or would you say that it's just culturally too different? It's like in the past, like Japanese visual novels or something, were completely not selling in the West and stuff like that, basically.
Okay, I think there is a point, but it depends on the company that's trying. Because, for example, at 11-bit studios, for example, we do have a certain style. Like the games we do, the games we promote are a different sort of entertainment, which does not fit well with the Chinese, style of aesthetics, etc. But we decided that that's the way we are gonna do it. Like we do make some adjustments, but like our games require a certain style, we're gonna stick to it. And some companies have that sort of approach. For most companies, it is hard because if you don't know anything about China, if you don't know about their aesthetics, their customs, etc., their humor, it won't work. It won't work definitely as well as it does, for example, in the United States, the UK, etc., etc. So the best option would be to find a partner or to find an agency and let them handle it. Like if you want to do it internally, completely internally, or if you want to have complete control over what your partner is going to do, well, it kind of misses the point.
Okay, thank you. But now one more question then.
Mhm.
So let's say that for a moment that I wanted to test a game, if it actually plays well with Chinese players, basically, because I cannot judge it outside. What way would you suggest to find some Chinese players to playtest the game without running into scams or running mostly into people who are like ethnically Chinese, but they spend their whole life living in the West, so to speak, so they might not be react the same way basically to the game.
Okay, as far as the game itself is concerned, um, that's a tricky question. Okay, basically speaking, for 90% of the cases, if the game doesn't sell in the West, it's not going to sell in China. Because I've had developers ask me, they were like, we like the game apparently sucks, like the Western players aren't buying it, so we thought that maybe like if we sell it in China, like we're gonna have huge sales, we're gonna make millions. No, like if the game is crap, it's gonna be crap all around the world. A good game will sell in China as well. Of course, whether or not it's gonna sell better or worse, um, there are certain things that might give you a certain idea. For example, things that they I've mentioned the co-op, right? If there's no co-op, chances are that the game is not going to be popular. If the aesthetics are, for example, comic-like, so either, for example, Marvel comic-like or Family Guy sort of aesthetics, they're not going to like that as well. They prefer manga, like anime, that sort of things. Um, if if I had something on my mind which slipped exactly at the point, but yeah, it's like there are things that you can go through to check whether it's going to have a higher possibility. It doesn't mean that it's definitely going to make it, right? Um, it might be a good idea to check with, for example, potential partners. Because if you get many emails from potential Chinese partners, it means that the game is going to sell. If you don't, means nobody's interested in buying it, right? So that's a good indicator of whether or not there is potential. You can actually try to reach out, for example, to the media, websites like Gamer Sky or 3DM. There are some people who speak English there, and you can just ask them, send them a press release and ask what do they think. Like, does the game have potential on the Chinese market, right? So there are some possibilities, but definitely, of course, asking Chinese people ABCs or BBCs, so like American-born Chinese or British-born Chinese, they're gonna have different aesthetics and different approach towards the game. So it's not gonna tell you much. Yeah. Okay, I remember this one joke where everybody was like laughing their asses off, and I was just standing there going, "Oh my God, what am I doing here?" There was a stage right next to a shopping mall, and there was a guy who was dressed as a lady, and he said like, "我是美女," which sounds like I am a beautiful girl. And another guy looks at him and he's like, 美女,你哪儿美啊? So, beautiful girl, where are you beautiful? And he's like, 不是美女,是没有女, which means I'm not a pretty girl, I'm not a girl. And that's the punchline. Because may and may, beautiful and none, not, sounds similar. So it's based on like the same sound, and like the people were cracking their asses off. Like they were, oh my God, it's so funny. And no, it wasn't. But I just didn't have the heart to tell them. So yeah, they are totally, definitely. You're gonna have a lot of jokes, for example, based on taking a shit. Apparently, like different, totally different.
Sorry, we need to end, but probably speaker will have time afterwards
sure.
and can answer.
Thank you again.